Good evening or good morning or afternoon, depending on when you guys are watching this. My project today is going to be on historical and current anthropogenic influences on wetlands. And I focused in on New Jersey here because that's where I'm from. Trying to make it a little bit more interesting. And we're also going to be focusing on coastal or tidal saltwater marshes because New Jersey is mostly a coastal state. Again, my name is Elena Golden. This is for Wetlands Ecology, BY 559 for the University of West Alabama. So we'll just dive right in here. We'll start off with introduction. So wetlands are of global importance due to the benefits that they provide. And we learned this in class mostly, but here's just a few that we're going to focus on today. So improved water quality, erosion prevention and control, erosion control from plant roots, flood abatement. The wetlands can absorb excess floodwaters, storm surges, things like that. And according to the EPA, U.S. flood damages average about 2 billion annually. And the 30-year averages is closer to 8 billion annually. So flood abatement is a big one. Habitat enhancement. Wetlands play an important role in the life cycles of many species, specifically amphibians and fish, sometimes key game fish species or economically important fish species. Wetlands are often hatcheries for species like this. And the last one, especially around here, is recreation. Hiking, birding is a big deal in wetlands areas, photography and hunting in some spaces as well. So a little bit of history. Early European settlers in the 1600s started off in the continental United States as a whole, approximately 221 million acres of wetlands. Now, this is an estimate. They didn't have great surveying techniques. They didn't have good record keeping. But we did find that by the mid-1980s, they found that only 103 million acres remained from the United States. And this was unevenly distributed as well. Some states saw a decrease about 85%. And I think in the South, the southern states, they got hit the hardest with filling in of wetlands and drainage, stuff like that. Historically, wetlands management, the idea was just to drain it, fill it in. They drain the wetlands in the name of progress and increasing their settlements, increasing the population, and just really in the name of progress. Now, over time, attitudes have changed about wetlands, and this has come about two ways, one culturally and one ecologically. But I think the cultural change, the cultural shift has been sort of connected to the ecological part. So the more we know, the more we find out, the more we study and learn about the benefits of wetlands, the more the attitude sort of shifts too. So I think they go hand in hand. So ecologically speaking, from their perspective, wetlands value lies in what it can provide. So fish, wildlife, and the environments that they live in. Like I said in the previous slide, fish species, especially commercially fished species, they start their life cycles often in wetlands habitats. Same thing with frogs, although that's not really, commercially, a value, but definitely key fish species is a big one. And then from the perspective of society, especially at that time, wetlands really didn't have a value unless they were drained. So, buildings, settlements, agriculture, all that stuff could take place. Over the years, people have begun to see the value of wetlands for its intrinsic values, like its beauty and for the service it provides and for recreation and birding and hunting and all those other things. But that's, like I said before, it's sort of gaining momentum as we learn more about its value. So tidal wetlands. For the purposes of my presentation, I want to focus primarily on the tidal wetlands, specifically New Jersey and the Northeast, because that's where I'm from. And so some of these spots have more significance to me and, hit home a little bit more. So I wanted to focus on those. If you take a look at this map here, this green, I don't know if you can see my arrow, this green along the edges from all the way up from Connecticut and into Maryland, Delaware, all the way down here, and especially the coast of New Jersey, especially the southern coast. Those are all tidal wetlands. We're going to focus on New Jersey for 3 specific regions for the next few slides. The Meadowlands, Raritan Bay, and then Barnegat Bay. There are many more regions than this, obviously, but I want to focus on these big 3 for a few reasons, and you'll see why in a second. So tidal marshes overall occur where ocean meets the land, right? And I'm going to go back to that slide for 1 second. Obviously, New Jersey is almost entirely coastal, right? It's all ocean. And so sea level rise is going to play a big part in this as well. But so we are very vulnerable to sea level rise. It's vital habitats for lots of aquatic organisms, like I said before, fish, crabs, shrimp, and as well as birds and mammals. Excuse me. Birding is a big one. Audubon Society has a lot of birding sanctuaries in these wetlands areas as well. And to provide us buffer against storm surges, winds, and flooding. Hurricanes are becoming more and more prevalent, and while New Jersey is not, on the Gulf Coast, and it's not really in that direct line of hurricane hits, it does happen. Hurricane Sandy was a big one for us. And as we speak tonight, the rain's moving in from Hurricane Ian. So we're talking about some storm surges from that too, although albeit nowhere near as what the devastation in Florida has been like. So another thing that tidal marshes do is absorb pollutants like toxic metals and nitrogen, which also can help reduce algal blooms and carbon dioxide and contribute to climate change. So tidal marshes, we're going to go on to here. So losses. So the first study we're going to talk about was a study from Rutgers University. And it was looking at tidal marshes being in danger of disappearing altogether by the next century if not addressed. And this study looks specifically at 4 different regions and specifically at losses due to sea level rise. Okay. And for each marsh system, they looked at the horizontal changes. Okay, so what is actually going on? Changes in the marsh area over time. For example, is the marsh changing from, being highly vegetated to being, maybe like a monoculture, or even if it's just a mud flat? What kind of changes are occurring? And then also vertical changes in elevation. And we'll talk about a little bit about sediment deposits and how, if you've got too much decomposition going on, excuse me, that you may have some changes in elevation there. So we start off with the Meadowlands. Sometimes this is called the Hackensack Meadowlands, named for the river that is running through it near it. It is nestled in one of the most populated regions of the state. You can take a look at this picture here. That's the New York City skyline, and here's a kayaker. So you can be deep in nature, kayaking, birding, whatever, and then turn a corner and there's the New York City skyline. So it's a really unique area. Also, for those of you who are Sopranos fans, there was a whole episode about the Meadowlands, little inferences to mob activity where you can hide the bodies in the Meadowlands, because it's this unique area of nothingness, right? Like just marsh and wilderness, and peace and quiet, but it's like right in between all of these major metropolitan areas, very highly populated areas. And the other thing, if you do a quick Google search of the Meadowlands, you're going to come up with these 2 big monstrosities. So the sports complex, MetLife Stadium, home to the New York Giants, for you football fans, and this giant $3 billion investment, which is the American Dream Mega Mall, which just opened, I want to say 2 years ago, but it's been under construction forever. It's a huge, huge, huge mall. It's got rides. It's got water parks, mini golf, all the stores you can ever imagine in restaurants. It's just a monstrosity. So it's gigantic. But on the other side of the coin, we have the 30.4 square miles of what we consider the wetlands in the Meadowlands. So it considers 8,000 acres of wetlands, 100 acres of open space, 21 parks, 8 miles of trail, and 3 boat launches. And here's another picture of kayakers in this area. Again, you can see the city skyline. It's just a neat place, an interesting place. So the researchers from the Rutgers study, the team from Newark, were looking at, remember, they were looking at wetlands losses due to sea level rise. And what was kind of ironic here is that they couldn't determine if there was wetlands losses from sea level rise because of the amount of development that was happening there. So it was sort of like the purpose of their study was like null and void because of like, it's just so much development there. You couldn't even tell what was being lost because of sea level rise because it was being lost due to other things like development. So the next one I want to look at here was Raritan Bay wetlands. This is another North Jersey area. You can see up here, New York is up here, Elizabeth, this is all North Jersey again. So Sandy Hook. Sandy Hook is a major birding area also. So same thing here. Rutgers' study was unable to determine if sea level rise was a contributing factor to wetlands losses here, again, because of so much development. But I thought this was interesting. The United States Army Corps of Engineers in 2020 announced that it would begin a restoration project. And here's a picture from that. To restore about 381 acres of wetlands and marine habitats, 6 miles of tidal channels, 50 acres of freshwater riverine habitat, 27 acres of coastal and maritime forest habitats, 39 acres of shallow water habitats, and 52 acres of oyster habitat. So it's doing two things. They're making new marsh islands and they're also restoring wetlands. This is a massive project, which is kind of funny. So they are kind of looking into, they know there's a problem, right? They know there's a problem with development. So I guess they're moving into these areas now to go ahead and make more room, make more restoration and make more wetlands, bring them back. We're going to talk about why in a second too. I'm going to circle back to that. And the last one for this project, at least, is Barnegat Bay. And this one is near and dear to my heart. So the difference between Barnegat Bay and Raritan Bay and the Meadowlands, Barnegat Bay is South Jersey. So completely different environment, definitely more rural. Not that it's without its developments. There's definitely things going on down there. But it is more open. And this is where people are going to the beach. Okay, think Jersey Shore. All right. So the importance of wetlands in Barnegat Bay is major upland flooding protection during storm events. During the storm events, it can remove about 85% of the nitrogen. Sorry, not during storm events, but separately, can remove about 85% of the nitrogen and 54% of the phosphorus entering the bay. That's a major thing for Barnegat Bay. And we also have a program in Barnegat Bay called Reclaim the Bay. So they're doing a lot of projects with Barnegat Bay as well. More than 28% of Barnegat Bay salt marshes have been lost due to development. So like I said, not without its development problems, but different environment. You're talking here about like they're building suburbs and housing developments and retirement communities versus like major cities and giant sports complexes. So still development, different kind. So here again, they did a big, I'll move my little head out of the way here. They did a big dump of money into this area. And this was in 2018, but this is, continuing on now. So they recognize the importance of the tidal marshes. And then they decided they were going to fund some major projects here. So they put $30,000 towards water quality restoration for Mordecai Island. Actually, the picture below is a picture of Mordecai Island. If you've ever been to, heard of Long Beach Island, it's a major shore resort in New Jersey. This is off the coast of that. Right now, it's an important stop for shorebirds and nesting shorebirds. It's a major Audubon Society protected area. They do a lot of like youth education programs there as well. So it's an important thing. So they're gonna do some water quality restoration there. $155,000 water quality restoration grant for, where do I keep yawning today? For the final design and construction of 130-foot living shoreline, and that's in Toms River, Ocean County. So a little bit north of Mordecai Island, where we're talking here. Then $1 million water quality restoration grant to design and construct about 2,600 linear feet of intertidal shelled living shoreline, including 10 oyster reefs. With Reclaim the Bay and adding oysters to these areas, that's going to also help with water quality. And that's in a place called Forked River. I don't know why they pronounce it that way, but we call it Forked River and Barnegat Bay, the intersection of those two waterways. Then we've got $3 million water quality restoration grant to design and construct another 2,600 living shoreline, including a breakwater and reef system. And this is around Caddis Island, which is another Ocean County park. Caddis Island is one of those places where like every child in New Jersey goes on a field trip. You learn about like the wetlands there, and you learn about like seining and fish and wildlife and stuff like that, and your primary education, like in elementary school. But they are doing a lot to preserve there, and it is considered one of the state parks or county parks. And then $350,000 water quality restoration grant to complete the design and construction of a huge 12,800 square feet of living shoreline that will provide resiliency against boat and wind-driven wave action. And this is called, this is up in Lanier Lagoon in Tuckerton Borough. I actually used to live in Tuckerton Borough. It's a very wet, marshy area that people built houses on that floods regularly and has lots of mosquitoes and flies. It's a cute little shore town when the wind's blowing in the right direction. Okay, let me slide this over. All right, so sea level rise is New Jersey's biggest issue facing wetlands, but it's not the only one. So I want to talk about a couple other issues that they're having. And one thing is increase in nutrients like nitrogen. Nitrogen is causing algal blooms that affect the biota of these estuaries. And salt marshes and tidal bay areas, overproduction of algae create problematic conditions. More nitrogen and more phosphorus means more algae, which means more dying algae and more dead organic matter. And then we have the buildup of sediments, buildup of dead organic matter. And then we also can have increasing anoxic conditions, which is not good because then it's going to perpetuate the cycle of things dying and more buildup of organic matter. Sediment buildup like this can cause blockages in the channels of the wetlands. And that makes it less resilient to the effects of sea level rise and also less efficient at storm protection. These problems began as early as the 1950s as populations and development grew and increasing the amount of runoff in those areas. So the more development that we have, the more runoff, the more fertilizers and pollutants getting into our waterways. And then we have this cycle of more algae, more dead organic matter, and it perpetuates and exacerbates really the issues of sea level rise. So this photo is showing a dredging of a tidal salt marsh by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And this was, I forget the exact location, but it is somewhere in Barnegat Bay Marsh area. I believe it was near Mordecai Island. but I'm not entirely sure of the exact location. So I also want to talk a little bit more about eutrophication. We just talked about the increase of algal blooms, but nitrogen and phosphorus can also contribute to marsh losses by increasing above ground biomass, right? Like artificial fertilizing, and you can have a decrease of the root mass, and you're going to have an increase of decomposition, and that can really destabilize the vegetation. And if you have this high above ground biomass and a decreased root mass, it's not going to take much wave action to knock over some of these larger top heavy plants that are again going to just build up, be more decaying matter, and cause that buildup of sedimentation. This picture here it's basically a stock photo, but you can see the algal bloom buildup, eutrophication in this photo. Okay, overfishing is another issue. Well, it's an issue in and of itself, but in the case of salt marshes, we can have an increase of herbivorous crabs because we have the decrease of the fish species or native fish species. And if they consume too much marsh grass, it's also going to lead to destabilization. They might see marsh grass die off because of these too many crabs. Same problems you can have if you have invasive species as well. And then things like modifications, this one's probably not as big of an issue, but it's worth mentioning. They do something called like mosquito ponds, or they dig, or they make dredges. And when they do this, they might do some damming of areas or dredging of other areas, and those human interactions, those human changes can end up leading to destabilization of the system as well. And carbon, it's worth mentioning carbon. I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier. Human-caused shift in carbons have major effects on biota, right? We know this. Carbon's a major problem from pollution. But in marine systems like wetlands and salt marshes and other marine habitats, we call it blue carbon. And in coastal wetlands, vegetation typically does a good job of sequestering carbon. But when we have issues like eutrophication and destabilizing of the plants and the vegetation themselves, the carbon is not going to be sequestered the way we want it to be, and that's also a problem that's going to just exacerbate other things. So to sum everything up, I think the main focus here, sea level rise is the main concern for wetlands losses in New Jersey. But there are other factors combined with sea level rise that are exacerbating the problem and accelerating it. Mainly eutrophication, excess fertilizers, runoff, and development. All of the issues, though, facing coastal salt marshes in New Jersey are human caused. Every single one of them. And many of the problems began as far back as the 1920s as these areas became more and more populated. We have seen an increase in interest and studies on coastal wetlands due in part to the fears of future sea level rise. I'm going to talk briefly about Hurricane Sandy, as you guys know. So Hurricane Sandy devastated the Northeast, but they did a study and they had some estimations that wetlands actually saved the Northeast about $625 million in property damages from Hurricane Sandy. And with sea level rise and with the increase in named storms, hurricanes, and with increasing likelihood that the Northeast will see another hit from them, New Jersey is investing a lot of money into restoration projects now. Most of the projects that I've talked about today have been recent, like I'm talking like 2018, but in the last 10 years or so, we really seen an uptake in interest in the restoration of wetlands in New Jersey. Eutrophication is a problem that's not going away anytime soon. We try to talk about decreasing, runoff. There's been educational resources on that, but that's going to be a problem. And so the solution that they seem to be, using for that is really just wetlands restoration by the Army Corps of Engineers. And they're doing things like dredging and creating, you know, reducing some of that sedimentation to keep the areas functioning as they should. Okay, so that wraps it up for me. I've got some references here on the last page. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Have a great night.